Hey there guys, Christian Mo here again. Let's finish up some Project Stingray stuff, shall we? So I promised you guys this week we were going to do a full build log, and that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to go over this entire machine, step by step, piece by piece, and show you exactly how to build one. So we're going to start with the motherboard, the processor, and the RAM, getting all this stuff sort of situated and organized to go in the case, and we'll take it from there. Let's get started. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started with our motherboard here. Now the first thing we're going to be doing is installing our CPU. So we're going to go ahead and take this, drop it right in our motherboard. Now to start, we're going to undo this little retention arm, we're going to pop this open, we're going to leave the little black plastic piece in there for now. So inside you'll see all those gold pins, and those are going to match up with some gold pads on the bottom of our processor here. Be careful not to touch either of them. Now to make sure we get our CPU lined up correctly, if you'll go ahead and notice, here on this one corner we have a nice little triangle mark. There is a matching one of those on the motherboard. So line those up and you're good to go. For extra protection, this CPU has little notches on one end, and those of course will line up with little notches in the CPU socket. So it's zero insertion force. We're just going to set this thing in there, give it a slight wiggle just to make sure it falls into place. Do not push down. To install it, just going to close the little arm, make sure our bracket falls underneath that screw, hit the retention arm, and our black plate pops off. Now it's very important you keep this thing, because if you ever have to send the motherboard back, you're going to need it to protect that socket. Just going to set it here and put it off to the side. So now we're going to go ahead and install our RAM. The RAM install is pretty easy. Just like the CPU, it is keyed. So you have a little notch here in the bottom of the RAM, and that lines up with a specific notch in the socket. Installing it is pretty easy. You're going to make sure that the arms on either side of the socket are open, and you're just going to set it in and push down. RAM does take a little bit of force, but you shouldn't have to push too hard. You'll know when it's in because the little arm will snap into place. Let's go ahead and pop in the other three modules, and we can move on. So there we go. Once all four modules are in, give it a nice little push, check all the arms on the side, make sure everything's in, and we are good to go. Now remember, if you don't have a 4-piece kit, you can only install 2 sticks at a time, but make sure if you install them, you put them in the correct order. It's usually every other, and the color slot matches that. Alright, now let's install this motherboard. We're going to start with this. This is the I/O shield. We're going to set it into the back of the case. Just a little piece of metal, and it just pops into that hole. Make sure you have it oriented correctly. Just set it in and give it a good solid push. After that, we're going to drop the motherboard in. Now there are 9 standoffs in this motherboard that have screw holes in them, and the board will fit right on these screws. And of course, all of your outlets will fit snugly through that I/O shield. Once you have the motherboard situated, we're just going to go ahead and start screwing it in. It's very easy. There's just a set of 9 screws. So we're going to go ahead and start here on this left edge, lock it in. Going to move to the outside edge, and that gives us the middle of the board done. From there, we're just going to slowly start screwing in every screw as we go around the board, covering all of the sides. Pretty simple and easy to get done. Nothing too crazy here. Now remember, you should have installed 9 screws, and you will find them all underneath these yellow circles on your motherboard. Alright, so that is motherboard prepped and installed. Now it's time to get everything ready to be wired up, and of course we have to install things like hard drives, video cards, and that liquid cooler. So let's get on to it. Alright, now that we have the motherboard in there, we're going to start with getting everything ready to wire up. So we're going to pull off this back plate here, and this is for our power supply. Just 4 little thumb screws and pull it off. From there, we're going to go ahead and set up the power supply, and we're going to drop this plate on here, and you just have to screw it in. It takes just 4 little screws. Make sure you get them in tight, but not overly tight. You don't want to strip anything out. Computer screws have a very bad habit of stripping themselves, so be careful there. And once you get all of them in, just give them a nice little check, make sure they're snug. Again, you want them in there to be snug, but not extremely tight. Now, once you have all those together, we're just going to take this bracket, drop it right into the computer case there, and then we're going to screw the thumb screws back in. It really is that simple. Now to get ready for our hard drive install, we're going to go ahead and do these thumb screws here, and we're going to slide out the hard drives trays. So we're going to need multiple trays because I have multiple hard drives, so we're just going to pull out all the ones we need. Same process, undo the 2 screws, and the tray just falls out. Now to install the hard drive, we're just going to set the tray on it, line up the screw holes, and just screw down some screws. Very simple, very easy. Now remember to follow the same rules as last time. We want this thing to be snug, but we don't want them to be overly tight. There are some rubber grommets here to reduce vibration, so it will take a little bit more effort to screw them in. Once you get all of your hard drives done, again making sure everything's tight, then we're just going to drop them back into the case. Easy as that. So to put them back in, it's the exact same process as taking them out. We're just going to slide them in, make sure everything lines up, and then we're just going to tighten some thumb screws. Once we get the first one in, we're just going to go ahead and install the rest of them. Alright, so this is our last hard drive. Now we're going to start getting wiring ready for the whole system. So my power supply has modular cables, so we're just going to start plugging everything in piece by piece. We're only using the cables that I need though. So we're going to start with the 24-pin power connector. And then from there we're going to set up the 8-pin power connector. This is for the CPU power. And then we've got accessories like hard drives and fans. And then we're going to start getting everything set up for the video cards. These are the red plugs. Now that we've got those plugged in, just set everything off to the side, and we'll have everything ready to go to run power to all of our components when we need them. Now the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to start plugging in the data cables for the hard drives. These are called Sata Cables. We're just going to plug them all in one by one, make sure everything is in line and organized, and these are what's going to feed the hard drive to the motherboard and provide data. Now move to the other side, we're going to start plugging in some of these cables. Here we have our 24-pin power supply connector. It goes on the right side of the motherboard. You can see this is a 20 plus 4 pin, which is how most of them are. So you have a big 20-pin connector and a 4-pin connector. You want to make sure that those are lined up correctly. Now when you put this into the slot, it is keyed, so there is just a little spring lock on one side, so this cable will only fit in one way. Again, you want to push firmly, but do not force anything. Forcing things in a computer will break them. After that one, we're going to go up to the top side of the motherboard here to where the CPU is, and this is our CPU power connector. They usually come in 4 and 8 pin. Ours has an 8 pin. Same thing, the plug is keyed. You want to get those lined up, set the key in there, and then just give it a nice solid push to plug it in. Again, be firm, but don't force. Alright, next we're going to use one of our front panel connectors. This is our USB 3.0. It says USB 3.0 right in there. It is always a blue plug, and it is also keyed with a little notch there. So find the notch on the board, match it to the notch on your plug, and just set it in there. And again, be firm, but do not force it. Also, fumble if you're trying to fiddle with the camera. There we go. Alright, now we're going to go to those SATA cables. So these are our data cables. These plug into the bottom right side of the motherboard there. So there's going to be 10 slots there. We're just going to pick the first 4 and start plugging them in. Now also for our front, we have our front panel audio. Now this connector says audio in it, even though you can't quite read it from this angle, and it is down near our sound chip. The cord has HD audio written on it, so you know exactly which one it is, and like everything else, it is keyed, so it has a pin block in there, so it will only fit in this one slot. So this is part of the reason why you want to be careful. If you're in the wrong slot, you don't want to break anything. So again, just set it in, give it a nice little push, and it'll lock in. Now we're going to do the same for our front USB 2.0 header. Again, just a simple USB plug. It looks just like the audio plug, plugs into the spots that say USB, but this one is keyed slightly differently. Where the audio plug had a block in the middle, this one has a block on a corner. Same as always, just get that lined up, set it right into the motherboard, push, and you're done. Now this is the most complicated part. This is the front panel connectors for LEDs, power switches, etc. These are usually done with very tiny cords like this, but thankfully we have a special adapter that we can use that comes with this Gigabyte motherboard to make life a million times easier. So here's our adapter, and everything is marked on it quite brightly and easily so you can read it. So you're going to start putting our speaker in here. This is just a little speaker that gives us our beeps when we start the computer so we can know if it's booting up correctly. From there, we're going to go ahead and take our power switch. Now, this one technically does not have a plus or a minus because it is just a connection. So we're going to look on the block for the switch that says power supply, and we're going to go ahead and just slide that in. Again, this can be a little finicky because these blocks are very tiny and hard to work with, but once you get it in, they'll snap in. For the LED, we have a plus and minus that are separate cables. Fiddle with those, and you can get those locked in too. Once everything's in, you're just going to slide that whole block into the connector. It is also keyed, so it will only fit the one way. Give it a push, and you are done. Now it's time to mount our radiator. This became a bit more difficult than I expected, simply because of the cooler we have. So this is an older cooler, and it is extremely thick. So when I was trying to get it in here, I noticed that with the thickness of the radiator, I couldn't get it mounted in the top and also fit the fans. The fans would bang against the motherboard. So what we're going to do is we're going to split the case, and we're going to put the fans on top since we have clearance for it, and sandwich the fans and the cooler in between the top of the motherboard. So just set the fans on top, give the screws a nice twist, lock them in place, and that compression between those two will hold everything together. Now to get the block on. Since we're using a used block, we have to clean the thermal material off of the old one. We're going to do that with alcohol and coffee filters. Now you use coffee filters because they are lint-free, so they make a great cloth to clean things off of special components like your CPU block. So we're going to go ahead and just put a bit of alcohol here on the coffee filter. Make sure you get it nice and wet, and then we're just going to slowly start to rub the old thermal compound off the CPU, just in nice soft circles. As the alcohol soaks into the material, it'll come off a lot easier, so it'll be a little hard at first. But once you give it a bit of a rub, rotate your cloth when it gets dirty, and then push just a bit harder, and you'll see all that material comes right off, leaving you with a nice shiny surface. So once that's clean, we are ready to install. We're going to start here by making sure our bracket is lined up, and then we're going to need to put some thermal paste on top of the CPU. I'm using Arctic Silver 5. What you want to do is put a small dab, about the size of a grain of rice, in the center of the CPU. We don't want to use too much, but we don't want to use too little. So a grain of rice is about the recommended size. Once we have that on there, we're going to take our cooler and we're going to start to line it up over our mounting holes. You can see we have 4 screws there. Now we're going to set it down and we're going to start to screw everything in. Now it's very important we don't over tighten anything on one direction, because we want the pressure of the CPU cooler to be even across the processor to spread out the cooler and to prevent damage. Now, just like when you're changing a tire, we want to make sure that once we get this thing tightened, we're going to tighten it all across a corner. So we're going to go one side, the other corner, one side, the other corner, just like you would doing lug nuts on a tire, so you can make sure you provide even pressure across the CPU. Now once we have the CPU cooler in, we have to worry about the fans and the plugs. So this one has 2 fan outlets, 1 fan inlet, and then we're going to have a USB power plug. So the top 2 plugs go to the fans that are up top. That plug plugs into our actual motherboard to power those fans, and then this is a USB plug that will plug into the bottom of the motherboard that actually powers the pump that makes the water cooler work. So very simple. I'm going to start running the cords up to kind of tuck them out of the way and get them up to where the fans are going. I'm going to take my fan plug. Again, I'm going to try and route it carefully so that it stays out of the way of everything else. And then we're going to have to plug it into the motherboard. I'm going to get the power plug ready, slide it through the back so that I can run it behind the motherboard to keep it out of the way as well. And now it's time for video cards. Now installing the video cards is a pretty easy process. The first thing you're going to want to take note of is where your PCIe slots are located, and then also the actual size of the card. So you can see that this is a double thickness card, so it's going to take up 2 slots on your motherboard. Now you want to make sure that you're picking the right PCI slots. For most motherboards, the very top one should be where you install single cards, but for multiple cards, the PCI lanes are rated at different speeds, so you need to read the speeds and make sure that they're in the right spot. For our motherboard, it's the top one and the third one. So to get things ready, we're going to undo these screws and we're going to loosen up these plates. We're going to have to remove those plates over our expansion slots to get the video cards in. So undo the screws, pull the pieces out. It's as easy as that. Just make sure you set them to the side so you have them later if you ever need them. Then it's time to get the video card in. Now we want to make sure that we get that back plate of the video card lined up as tight as we can into the slot. There's just a tiny gap between the case and the motherboard. So you want to set it in there, and again, like everything else, you want to make sure you give the video card a nice solid push without actually forcing it. And there is a small retention clip on the back of the PCIe slot, so to make sure the video card is in properly, push it in and then give it a slight tug to make sure it doesn't come out. Once you get the first one installed, you're just going to go ahead and line up the second one and follow the exact same process. Line up that back bracket, make sure you're in the slot, give it a nice solid push, make sure it snaps in, and give it just a little tug to make sure it's in properly. Then we're going to take those thumb screws and lock that card into place. From there, we need to power it, so we're going to use our red PCIe pins. We have 8 pins here, so these are 6 plus 2 connectors. Just like everything else, they have little block attachments, so just make sure they're oriented the right way. Plug them in, as always, firm but not forceful, and you will hear the clips snap into place. Once you get power onto the first card, go ahead and set them up, and we're going to plug in the second card. Alright, first one in. Again, make sure those plugs are lined up properly. Little clip, snap it in, and you're good to go. Now next we're going to do power for the hard drives. This is a long SATA cable with multiple outlets, so I'm just going to start on the top and plug them in piece by piece all the way down. This is a nice way to do the power without having too many cables running through your system. Now of course we have this gigantic spaghetti mess back here that we need to try and take care of. So we're going to use the power of zip ties. So what you want to do is just take a look at your cables and just start organizing things into clumps and bunches. So if you have a bunch of wires that are sort of in a spot and unruly, just gather them together and sort of zip tie them to make sure that they stay a tight bundle. The tight bundle is what you want. That's easier to manage. Once you do that, you're just going to slowly go around the case using the various tie down points, and you're just going to keep zip tying things together until the cables are flatter, smoother, and more organized around the actual case. It's sort of a time-consuming process, but it'll make life a lot easier for you in the future. It improves airflow, makes the back of the case look a little bit easier, or looks a little bit nicer on the eyes, and it makes it easier to put the back plate on the case. All these are very important things. So just going to keep running wires, and then when we get to the bottom, this specific case has a very large basement in it, so I have a lot of extra room that I can just sort of stuff and tuck the excess wire as I need it. But again, all the stuff that's running around the case, we want to make sure that is tied down as well as possible. Alright guys, there it is. That is Project Stingray completely assembled. Now all we have to do is finish up our visual mods and this thing is done. Now of course we're going to put the Jake logo in the window on the side panel, and then we have to do that Corvette logo. And I also have a little surprise for you as well. So let's get started. Alright, now for the side window. First thing we're going to start with is cleaning. So we're going to take our old friend here, we got the alcohol, and we have our coffee filter. Of course, we're going to do the same thing as we did the CPU processor. We're just going to get some alcohol in here and give this a nice solid wipe just to make sure that the window is clean from any debris, smears, dirt, anything that might interfere with the application of the vinyl. Now we're going to go ahead and peel the vinyl apart from the paper backing, and we're going to try and get everything lined up. Now it's very important to get this lined up as square as you possibly can, because once you put this vinyl down, especially this one, you can't really get it up. So it's very important to get it lined up as straight as you can to start with. Now once you get it where you think you want it, we're just going to go ahead and set it down, and you're just going to start smoothing it out with your fingers. Make sure you get it as flat and as smooth as possible. Once you get that taken care of, we're going to start slowly peeling off the paper backing, being careful to make sure you're not pulling up any of the sticker with it. Be very smooth around the edges, and voila. Now to get the best finish possible, you're going to want to take a credit card or an ID or something and use that to start smoothing out the bubbles. Be slow and be gentle to get the bubbles undone. If you see any teeny tiny like micro bubbles, don't worry about that. Most of those will smooth themselves out over time. What we're concerned with is big bubbles and creases. So once you have all those smoothed out, your window should be just about ready to go. Now from the window, we're going to have to move on to do the Corvette badge. Now the Corvette badge is going to be a lot easier to get straight. It's going to be a lot easier to set up because it came with an alcohol swab and I have T-square. So we're going to set the T-square on the case to get everything lined up. But first, we need to prep. So instead of using our alcohol, this came with an alcohol swab. So I'm just going to pull that out. And again, just like before, you want to make sure you get the spot where you're applying as clean as possible to make sure you get the best adhesion possible. So just go ahead and give that a nice solid wipe down. let it dry, and you're ready to move on to the next step. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to line up the Corvette logo about where I want it vertically on the case, and I'm going to set up the T-square. The T-square is to make sure I get it as level and as straight as possible, while also making sure I measure it left to right. So once I get the height adjusted, we're going to go ahead and try and figure out where I want this thing, and we're going to make a note of the measurements left and right. Once we get the measurements left and right where we want them, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to peel off the backing. Now remember, this is permanent stick, so we have to be very careful here. Now we're going to take the very top points and line them up directly with our marks on our T-square here, and once we have them organized left to right, we're just going to lay the thing down. Once it's down, give it a nice solid push to set it. There we go. Up and down, make sure it sits solid. We can pull off the T-square, and from there, all we have to do is just provide a bit of extra pressure just to make sure we get a nice solid seal all the way around. We don't want air to be exposed to that adhesive, make it dry up and be useless, and then have this badge fall off in a couple years. So there we go. Here is what the finished product looks like. We have our nice Jake vinyl on the window, have our Corvette badge. Looks like $1 million, that Carbon Flash OEM badge. And here it is with our lights on. There she goes. Alright guys, there it is. That is the visual mods for the Project Stingray computer done. But I promised you I had a little bit of a surprise, and I'm going to give you that now. So when we got done with the window and the badge, I thought that looks great, but there's a lot of dead and empty space on this computer, especially on the other side. So I saw this t-shirt that I have. I picked this up at the Daytona 24-hour race. I thought it'd be really cool if I could get this design into the computer. So I called up the guy who did the vinyl for me, and we made this thing happen. Yeah, look at that. What we did is we just took this design, I took a picture of it, we loaded it up into Photoshop, drew new lines, traced over it, and basically just made a recreation of it with a few simpler designs and pieces so that it would actually translate well to vinyl. Then we got it cut, laid in here, and look at that. That thing looks like $1 million freaking dollars. Now, yes, this is going on the back side of the case, opposite from what I normally see, but if I ever decide to move the computer from one side of my office to the other, or anytime I take it out to some sort of an event, you can see both sides of it, and I'll always know this is there. It's just a nice little extra touch of just visual awesomeness that I thought really fit the build and the computer as a whole. And speaking of, there it is. Yeah, look at it. Sitting there in all of its glory. Now, I might still change a few more things. We've gotten a lot of comments about how NVIDIA has now released the new GTX 1080 cards instead of just the 980 Ti, so there's now a more powerful card out than the ones I have in here. So we can maybe do an upgrade later, we'll look into that. And then of course the lights. I bought the lights, I wanted them to be white. They definitely look a lot more blue than white, so I might have to do something about that. But that's the build, guys. That is Project Stingray. From start to finish, we are done. The only thing that's left to do now is actually run real performance numbers and do testing in some of our favorite games to see how this thing performs in 4K, how it performs on that awesome 21:9 monitor, and of course, how it handles VR. Because I think VR racing is probably the future for gaming. So, there you guys have it. Stick around for the next time. We're going to have all those performance numbers and benchmarks, but just to give you a little bit of a teaser, I will say that with this machine running right here, and I still don't have all the overclocks dialed in, we're pulling about 140 frames per second in Grid Autosport at 4K with every single setting maxed. So this is definitely a powerhouse. Stick around for that one. Anyways, I'm Christian Mo. This has been a Project Stingray video for Corvette Forum. I'll see you guys next time.